One of you sent me this story. Thank you. It was a recent discussion that Briahna Joy Gray and Robbie had on Rising. Now, this was in reference to Nikki Haley's comments in reference to the Civil War, in reference to the Civil War and Nikki Haley not mentioning slavery. And I actually hadn't seen this at that point in time. So when I covered that story, that's why I didn't talk about this. But I think we need to talk about some of the things that were said during this debate here with Bree and Robbie. First, I want to start off with this document that Bree is reading in reference to Mississippi secession during that time. So let's go into that part first, and then we'll get into the actual debate.
Someone pulled Mississippi's secession document, in which they state very clearly, this is after a first sentence, which says we're leaving the Union. The second sentence in Mississippi's declaration of immediate causes which induce and justify the secession of the state of Mississippi from the federal union, they say, our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world. Its labor supplies the product which constitutes by far the largest and most important portions of commerce of the earth. These products are peculiar to the climate verging on the tropical regions, and by an imperious law of nature, none but the black race can bear exposure to the tropical sun. These products have become necessities of the world, and a blow at slavery is a blow at commerce and civilization. That blow has been long aimed at the institution and was at the point of reaching its consummation. There was no choice left to us but submission to the mandates of abolition or dissolution of the Union, whose principles have been subverted to work at our ruin.
So that piece there that Bree just read points to that once again, slavery was a part of capitalism, right? It was free labor. And that was from Mississippi. So they were basically stating there that we are not willing to remove slavery. We want to keep things the way that they are, because obviously they were talking about capital, right? They didn't want to have to pay the slaves, et cetera, et cetera. And they're like, they're the only ones that know how to grow these products and produce these products. We talked about this before. And I told you guys, having lived in South Carolina, that one of the big products in South Carolina during that time was rice. So when colonizers came to North America, later came to the United States later on, they didn't actually know how to grow rice successfully. So they brought slaves over from Africa to grow rice. So rice was really big in parts of South Carolina, particularly in Charleston as well. I told you with Rhode Island, their big product was rum. So yes, Rhode Island had slavery. Some people always give me a shock look when they hear me say that, but that was the third largest actually was Rhode Island. So again, it was about slavery. It was about capitalism, and it was also about free labor. So let's go a little bit further here, and then we'll get to the next part.
They wanted to continue slavery. I'm not arguing with you.
And not only that, they wanted to continue slavery in service of some of the things that Nikki Haley said there that America is trying to preserve. She said this is about capitalism. This is about government should be about supporting people's ability to have freedoms, to do what they want to do. And I think that what's so frustrating by people who are not conservative is this framing of freedoms always excludes the question of freedoms for who. While making an argument about government and how it should be in service of capitalism, the people who wanted slavery also believe that to be the case, which is why they wanted to leave the federal government. But in their view, the freedom of them to own slaves and to do what they thought only black people could do was produce these products that the world needed, but only black labor could produce, was the core, primary, immediate driving purpose of them leaving the Union. So yes, we do live in a country where I think saying that out loud is stigmatizing, despite how true it is. But there are a lot of people who do call it the war of Northern aggression, who see the Civil War, who maintain the Civil War was about states' rights without asking the question, states' rights to do what exactly? And there is something frustrating about Nikki Haley's persistence here and tiptoeing around those people when giving an answer in New Hampshire, a very northeastern state that had absolutely nothing to do with the Confederacy.
Yeah, she just should have said slavery. What else do you want me to say?
So another.
So we're going to go to the next part in just a second. But one thing that I do want to add is that when Bree mentions the states' rights, when I lived in the South, I'll never forget this. I'm telling you guys, I heard some wild things. Okay. When I lived in the South, did you know I went to a party like my freshman year, me and my roommate at that time, she was from New Jersey originally. Her family moved further south, but she was originally from New Jersey. She had a very thick Jersey accent, so it was very thick. And we were at a party. It was a frat party. And you know how these college parties go. Like, so especially as a freshman, what's your name? What's your major? Where you're from? Like that kind of thing. And this guy was asking her like where she's from. She said, Jersey. This guy looked at my friend and said, the South should have won the war. Like people would say like weird, just random, just weird things like that. Like, what are you talking about? Because if you come and say that to me and you say the South should have won the war, you're basically telling me that we should have still had slaves in this country. So when people say it wasn't about slavery, it was about slave rights, what were one of the rights that they were fighting for? The right to keep slaves. Don't let people try to gaslight you with that BS. It was just about freedom. It was just about slaves' rights. No, it was about the rights to keep slaves, not just about states' rights. Now, this is the part where the debate comes in. I don't know what Robbie was thinking when he made this comment, but here we go.
But you could also, there are other things one can say about the circumstances leading to the Civil War. It doesn't seem really important to talk about, which is maybe why there was a level of annoying that question got asked, because why? And I'm sure the person asking it probably was a Democratic plant, as alleged. But, you have to be prepared for that kind of thing. So
I mean, it's New Hampshire. It's a state with a lot of independent voters. I don't know if it's a Democratic plant so much as that it's probably a person.
Okay, it was somebody that was trying to get Nikki Haley in trouble.
Yeah,
and she fell for it.
A person, like this feels a little like when Democrats argue that Russiagate did posts that made the election outcome for Trump in 2016. And then the post they'll point to is something that says, like, America has a history with racism. And they're like, oh, black people were deluded by Russia into thinking America has a history of racism. It's like, well, right. It's a true statement. Either you can confront the true statement and deal with it, or you can't. If people are saying true things that make you look bad, that's on you, bub. You can't externalize blame on that one. And this, Haley framed, she said, well, this is a hard question, like, sarcastically, oh, hit me with an easy question, why don't you? It actually was an easy question. It's an easy question in a country, in a world, and in a political environment where you can say honest historical facts about the things that happened in American history. Honest historical facts about the war that took more American lives than any war in American history. But we don't live in that country. And at the same time that she's prevaricating on that stage, we have people like Christopher Rufo and Ron DeSantis who are actively trying to pull African American history, which is American history, from schools, so that no one will read what I just read into the record here about what Mississippi's secession document actually says.
The thing is that Nikki Haley was basically, she didn't want to bring that up because she was trying to pander to her base. And she knows once she goes into that territory, it's like, oh, that's going to turn off some people that are part of her base. That's really what this was about. I mean, the fact that Vivek and Ron DeSantis actually afterwards schooled her on, like, called her out for this and schooled her on this. Don't get me wrong. Like, this is a game like all politicians play, like they are running against each other. I don't know if Ron DeSantis would have answered that properly either. But the thing is that was basically a missed opportunity for Nikki Haley, but it wasn't an accident. It was on purpose. And I want people to understand that she was pandering to her base, so she knew that would upset certain people. So here we go.
Nobody is trying to stop you from reading about Mississippi's succession document.
Robbie.
What are you? No. The reality about the Civil War, it has been taught, is being taught, and will continue to be taught. We're not like it's not Confederates planning our school books. There was. I'm surprised you have this. It sounds. The North did you could say that was fine. They needed to do that, and this was necessary to end the institution of slavery, which is horrible. The hundreds of thousands of deaths, the invasion and conquest of the South, the burning of city after city, a scorched earth policy of totally destroying the Confederate armed forces, killing and capturing their leaders. That's fine. That's what we did. We can't examine. I think it's fine to wonder if that was like the greatest course of action or the ideal way to bring about the end of slavery, particularly because.
Let's go back to something Robbie said here, because I want to point out something, guys. I want to show you how. Just pay attention. Just walk with me here.
Which is American history from schools, so that no one will read what I just read into the record here about what Mississippi's secession document actually says.
Nobody is trying to stop you from reading about Mississippi's secession document.
Robbie.
What are you? No. The reality about the Civil War, it has been taught, is being taught, and will continue to be taught. We're not like it's not Confederates planning our school books.
Pause. It will continue to be taught from what perspective and from whose perspective? He said it's not Confederates planning our school books. I don't see any black people planning those school books either, Robbie. You don't have to be a Confederate. You don't have to be a part of the Confederacy or a son or a daughter of the Confederacy to have those views. You don't have to have the. See, this is another thing again where I feel like people confuse overt and covert. Like they think that the only type of racism is overt racism. There's also covert racism. And also one of the biggest tricks of white supremacy is to actually get someone who's black to do it for you. That's your Kamala Harris. That's your Barack Obama. So you got to pay attention to those things. That's your Hakeem Jeffries, pandering to countries like Israel and ignoring the plight of black Americans in this country. But pay attention to this part.
I mean, I'm surprised you have this. It sounds, I mean, the North did you could say that was fine. They needed to do that, and this was necessary to end the institution of slavery, which is horrible. The hundreds of thousands of deaths, the invasion and conquest of the South, the burning of city after city.
That part right there, the burning of city after city. Now he's speaking about that in reference to the Civil War and the North coming in to fight against the South. But when we talk about burning of city by city, that was also Black Wall Street. That was Black Wall Street. When we're talking about the time after Reconstruction, when Black people actually had their own communities and were actually doing well financially and was able to turn the dollar in the Black community over and over, there were several Black Wall Streets in this country, not just one. Everyone mentioned Tulsa, but there were several Black Wall Streets. There were Black Wall Streets in North Carolina, not just in Oklahoma. And guess what? They were burned to the ground. Follow this.
A scorched earth policy of totally destroying the Confederate armed forces, killing and capturing their leaders. That's fine. That's what we did. We can't examine. I mean, I think it's fine to wonder if that was the greatest course of action or the ideal way to bring about the end of slavery, particularly because the North invented the draft and the purpose of doing it, which is, in my view, also a form of slavery, that then persisted for another 100 years.
Watch Bree's expression.
Forcing people to.
So here was Robbie comparing the draft to chattel slavery. It's one of those moments where it's I'm sitting up here wondering how this conversation would have gone if Bree was not sitting at that desk. Because the reality is this. This is a perfect example of when someone is trying to talk about what happened to a particular group of people at that point in time. This is a perfect example of someone else coming in, maybe it might be Robbie, someone else coming in and saying, but let me tell you how my people were also affected. This is not about, it's just, this is not the time, Robbie. This is not about the draft. I don't agree with the draft. I'm sure Bree doesn't agree with the draft. But the conversation at hand at that point in time was about slavery. For you to make the comparison of slavery versus the draft, this is not the same thing. People were forced to this country against their will in chains. The women had their babies taken away from them. And I'm not even going to get too graphic on the show and tell you how they took the babies away from them. They were whipped. There was separation between lighter skinned Black people and darker skinned Black people, which still goes on today, by the way. All right. So they took the lighter skinned slaves and they let them stay in the house with the master. And the darker skinned slaves had to work out in the field. And you wonder why we have colorism in this country still today. They didn't even give the slaves the same type of food to eat that they ate. They gave them the scraps. Took the children, took the husband away from the wife. So when people say that, well, Black people wouldn't have these problems if the fathers would stay in the home. The first time the Black father was taken away from the family was during slavery, okay? Then it happened again during the war on drugs. This is not the same as the draft. Not to mention some people volunteered to fight for the Civil War. I could just not believe he made this comparison.
Go die in warfare is the most objectionable thing I could possibly think of.
Weird. I think 400 years of chattel slavery having ritualized.
If the government can make you die. If they can make you die.
Do you think slave owners can kill their slaves didn't kill their slaves?
I'm saying this is a form of slavery. I'm not saying slavery is not slavery.
You just said that the draft is the worst thing that you could think of. And we're having a conversation about chattel slavery.
If the government can make you go die on a foreign battlefield, you don't own yourself in any conceivable way.
So let me break this down for a second. First of all, white people that fought in the Civil War still had rights, Robbie. Slaves didn't have any rights at all. Slaves weren't allowed to even read. You can't. This is why I said again, like, we cannot do this whole, well, what about me? There's a time and place for you to include yourself, but this is not that time. This is not that time. So the thing is, again, slaves did not have any rights. They were considered to be property. They weren't even considered to be people. And again, like I said, some of those soldiers volunteered to fight in the Civil War. Don't agree with the draft. Not for it. Don't think it's a cool thing. But you cannot put that on the same level as chattel slavery in this country.
So
that's why I don't romanticize the North Side.
You have a right to get married if you're in a war. If you're drafted, you have a right to keep your own children, not have them literally sold away from you as property. You have a right to wages for your labor. You had a right to a GI Bill.
One kind of slavery is the right way to get.
Robbie, you can make your point without making a comparison between the draft and chattel slavery, which was a multi-generational pogrom against millions of Africans who were brought across the Atlantic and kept for hundreds of years without a single right in the land.
Very bad. Shouldn't have done any of it. Should not have enslaved people in the course of ending it.
But see, at this point, I feel like he still doesn't get it. He still doesn't understand how problematic his statement was. That's the thing. And I said this on Twitter too. I was like, I cannot believe this. Just crazy to me. Because that tells me, again, we missed something here in this country. Germany talks about the Holocaust. And they said that they've learned from that. They paid reparations to Jewish people. Germany did. But in this country, we missed something. People still don't fully understand. Like, I don't understand how you can see that as the same thing, because it's not the same thing. And I think part of the problem is because the history books have actually whitewashed slavery. If you want to know what really happened during slavery, you're going to have to do some research yourself. Go to the library and grab some history books from the library, not the textbooks, because some of the things that happened would be too graphic for them to put in a textbook for K through 12 school. Not to mention what they did to the women, what they did to the men. Some things I can't say on here, but you can figure it out. So it's not the same. But I felt like this was one of those moments where it's like you're talking about what has happened to Black people, and another group tries to insert theirself into your oppression. And you can't be doing this, guys. Look, I'm here to tell you, when I started this channel as an interview channel. I interviewed progressive candidates. I interviewed activists. I still interview them on the show. Well, not progressive candidates run through Democratic Party, but I still interview activists and stuff like that, like on the show. Journalists, that kind of thing. Then I turned more into a news program, but I still do interviews. So it's news and interviews. But one of the reasons why I started this show is because I was very frustrated. And same thing over at RBN. One of the reasons why we started was because we were very frustrated with the narrative, not just from mainstream media, but the narrative around the plight of Black Americans in this country that was coming from independent media. Because when you looked around, it was mainly what? It was mainly white men. When I watched left independent media, who did you have, right? It was Majority Report. It was Secular Talk. It was Rising, although Rising has two different political points of view. It was, who else were we watching during that time? Oh, TYT. I used to watch TYT and stuff. And I would hear them talk about, when it came to like Black issues, I feel like they were not talking about it from the right perspective because they didn't have that lived experience. So it was important to me that when I started this, that I fill in those holes that they did not fill in. But this is what happens when you just have that voice.
And in fact, it is obviously prohibited by the same amendment to our Constitution that end slavery should have applied to the draft as well. But
all right,
I don't like people. I don't like people dying. I don't like people being enslaved. I don't want any of this, and I don't know what we're arguing about at this point.
Me either.
What? So you support the draft?
I support not comparing the draft to chattel slavery.
Okay, so you support what, the invasion of the South and the killing of hundreds of thousands of people and the burning of all their cities?
To free my.
See, this is the do you condemn Hamas perspective sliding into this conversation, where Robbie says, oh, so you support the burning of the cities and all of that war that happened as part of the Civil War? And this goes back to the question I asked you guys again about the people in Gaza. Do oppressed people have the right to resist? And I'll continue to ask that question because that's how we should look at this. Or do they have to remain enslaved? Do they have to remain occupied?
Ancestors? Hell yeah, Robbie.
Okay, we found a war you can get excited about. Yes, total destruction until they surrender. Very interesting.
So when we're talking about Gaza, you say, well, if Hamas will just surrender, then we don't have to have a war anymore.
Exactly.
Well, the South just released the slaves. They wouldn't have to have a civil war.
Exactly. And they destroyed every city and every armed force until they achieved that outcome. That's what I'm saying. No, you have a problem with this as applied to any other conflict, but not this one.
The difference is, Robbie, that you ignore the fact that 2.3 million Palestinians have been kept in an open-air prison for decades, after 700,000 of them that lived and were indigenous to the land now called Israel were driven out in an ethnic cleansing event in 1948 at the founding of Israel. Subsequently, they were living under those chattel conditions with a blockade where Israel wouldn't even let them have chocolate. They have to have special passes and checkpoints like apartheid South Africa to get from one point to another. They were being kept on a starvation diet. They were not given access to medicine, food, and they were ritualistically, routinely the lawn was mowed, where hundreds of Palestinians were kept on
They
killed
put
on a
terrorists
yearly...
in charge of their government. Those terrorists attacked the state of
Who's they?
Israel.
Benjamin
Israel is now
All right. I'm
continuing this action until it defeats them, just as the North did to the South in the Civil War.
I
If
think
you'd been
it's very
around then,
telling.
I don't know. To be consistent, I think you'd have to be saying, no, they should hold back. They should permanent ceasefire.
No. What Robbie doesn't get here is that, again, when it comes to the Civil War, when it comes to slavery issue, when it comes to Israel and Gaza, the people who are oppressed are not in power. The state of Israel is in power when it comes to Gaza, the Palestinian people, and when it comes to the West Bank. They are the ones in power. The Palestinians are not in control. When it came to the issue of civil war in this country, part of the big reason because of the Civil War was because the South didn't want to free the slaves. They wanted to keep slavery, right? Who was oppressed? The slaves were oppressed. White slave owners were in power. So I ask this question again, people, and we really got to drive this home. Do oppressed people have the right to resist? If it were you and you were in that situation, what would you want to do? See, this is why, let him finish here.
That would be ridiculous because they were going to continue. Would you have said that in the Civil War circumstance?
Wait, first of all, you're dramatically, I wasn't going to touch this because this is going long and not the point, but you're dramatically mischaracterizing.
You said they won't let them read the Missouri secession document in schools anymore.
It was Mississippi.
Whatever it was.
What I was going to say was that it was beside the point, but you're dramatically mischaracterizing how the Civil War was handled. While slaves got nothing, slave owners were literally paid reparations and given the cost of their losses and made whole during the war. And after
again, protecting capitalism. And that's what people need to hear. You got to drive that home. When people say, oh, I'm against reparations, slave owners got reparations.
After a very brief period where it looked like there would be some semblance of enforced equality in the South, it went out the door after Lincoln's death. And we had a very brief period where we actually had black senators elected and the like in the South. And then we had a pogrom of post-war life and indentured servitude and Jim Crow laws that were almost as bad as the slavery itself, which lasted up until the civil rights era when my parents were born. So, excuse me, this is not a historical abstraction, although for people who don't read, who live in Florida, very soon it might just be an abstraction as they're disallowed from actually taking African American classes at these state schools.
Go ahead.
But this is really real. And I do think it's very telling that the same people who I think would likely probably defend the South in the Civil War, a lot of the people who aren't understanding why the cause of freedom is so important for Palestinians. It's so important for Black people because fundamentally there are some inalienable rights which are in our Constitution, but which were not evenly applied to all human beings in the United States of America because Black people under the law were not considered to be full human beings, according to our Constitution.
And I'm saying it's totally inconsistent, your view on whether is the correct course of action for a government to invade another area seeking the total elimination and destruction of an enemy government and then imposing new conditions on it.
The North was Israel is not seeking the total elimination of a government.
Hamas is the government of the area.
Israel is in, I don't know how many experts have to go on TV and say this. Israel is doing a genocidal campaign against the people of Gaza.
They are not. That is not true.
It is 100%.
I think it's one of those times where I think Robbie doesn't want it to be true. Sometimes when you don't want something to be true, you say that it's not true, but it is true. It is true. I don't know how many times you have to see the videos of people like Netanyahu and other officials from the ministry in Israel making these blanket statements saying that they want the Palestinian people gone. And this goes back years before this war even started. But again, I think Robbie wants it to be so. And sometimes when you want it to be so, you say that something is true when it's not true.
True.
Well, it's not.
They have killed over 200,000 people, half of which are children. They have killed 11,000 children.
20,000.
20,000 children. Half of them, 11,000 of them are children. They have bombed almost every residential building in Gaza, churches, schools, universities, so that nobody can go back. They have explicitly stated a plan of ethnically cleansing them to either Arab countries in the region or to the Sinai Peninsula specifically. They are planting literal flags at the same time that their kill ratio of actual members of Hamas to civilians is lower than what the terrorists did on October 7th. This is not a pogrom. This is not an effort to get rid of Hamas. And if you are believing that and repeating that at this point, I don't know what to tell you. If they are after Hamas, they're the most ineffectual, inept, ridiculous army in the world, and they shouldn't get a cent more of American dollar, and nobody should take them seriously. By contrast, we had a country called the United States of America, half of which decided that they were willing to leave the Union in order to maintain the institution of slavery. And we fought a war to end it. They did not that just randomly do sniper attacks and kill Confederate soldiers.
Briahna, that is ridiculous. They burned cities down. They killed half the entire population of military age men. There were all sorts of atrocities committed. It's fine. It's warfare. It happens.
Would Robbie have this same type of passion and fire about the Black Wall Street cities that were burned? Would he have that same type of passion and fire about that?
I'm not saying I'm against it or it's unjustified, but it is warfare, and that's how warfare goes.
Robbie, they killed military men? Wow, I wish they were killing military men in Gaza, but
this is warfare. It is bloody. It is destructive.
Robbie,
they blow up things. You burn them down.
Specifically said, how many Israeli officials have to get on TV and say, they're all Hamas? Everyone's a likely target.
If you had smartphones back then, it would look the same way.
It wouldn't, because
That's
that many
true.
people. It's just, Robbie. Look. I don't have to finish this conversation with you because you're representing a viewpoint that is like nobody's. And so I'm happy it's your read. Go ahead and end the segment. I don't need to argue with you.
I'm representing a viewpoint that's nobody's?
Yes, I don't need to sit and argue with you that actually the Civil War was much more cruel and that the North was worse than the South and the literal genocide that we're seeing unfold in front of our eyes.
Well, that's not putting word in my mouth. I'm not saying that.
You can feel free to clarify and wrap at your leisure.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a lot of work to do in this country. We have a lot of work to do in this country to get people to understand the plight of what has happened to Black Americans in this country. And it doesn't just stop with slavery. And that's the other point. Like, even after that, there were Jim Crow laws. There was the burning down of the Black Wall Streets. There was also, even after that, you have to deal with, everybody likes to praise FDR for his New Deal, but how many of those programs that FDR implemented actually left out Black people and Indigenous people? That's why Bree mentioned the GI Bill. There's that too as well. You also have to talk about the issue with the crime bill, which was co-written by Joe Biden. Then you had the war on drugs, and you had the crime bill. So all of these things that affected primarily the African American community, it is very clear to me that we still have a lot of work to be done in this country when it comes to history. Very clear to me.